All right, so friends, there are a few kids in the room that I can see. Hey, how's it going? We want to just take a minute to let you guys leave, to go to a space and time together where you can be with other kids your age. This is for folks, for kids kind of kindergarten, first grade through fifth grade. So we send you off to have a great, wonderful time together, learning about God's love, connecting with each other and with God. Yay! I deeply appreciate this video that's been carrying us through this summer. I appreciate how it's Pastor Katie's voice. So even as she was here for my sabbatical, we still get to hear her voice like in this space. I just really appreciate that, and I'm grateful for her and for the ways in which she lingers here with us. So that's great. Friends, as we settle into some time together, I invite you just to take a deep breath, close your eyes, roll your shoulders back. Trace that breath going down deep in and then being released. Wiggle your toes and feel your feet on this floor in this place. Let's let ourselves show up a little bit. Wonderful. So friends, it is good to see you again. Second Sunday back for me. And so good morning, especially to those who I haven't seen since I've gotten back. Good to see you. Just a continued word of gratitude for the space that was made in this place for me to be gone for 3 months. So thank you for that. So last week I did share a little bit about my love story of sabbatical. So if you missed it and you're curious about my sabbatical, go back and listen to it. If you're not curious, then don't worry about it. But to hear more about it, do go check that out. What we did last week, I took you on a little journey of my sabbatical. We got to giggle a little bit about how my sabbatical was a bit like the old show, This Is Your Life, and how all these folks who were a part of my entire life kept popping up throughout these 3 months that I was away. So it was a journey then that I walked us through of what my sabbatical was as a journey through people who used to be my people. And I brought it up because I wanted to name in the midst of this, as the video reminds us, we're in this journey through love story, how Jesus lived and taught God's story of love, how we're invited into this story of God, and yes, Jesus invites us to be people who love stories. Our own stories, to remember our own stories and to find ways to love them, but then also to love the stories of others. So I'm so grateful that my time of sabbatical was a time of remembering to love my own story again. So last week we walked through some of the people who used to be my people, because I wanted to say really loudly and clearly what I experienced, that to talk about what it means to be people who love our stories, we must acknowledge and celebrate that our stories are so deeply shaped by the people who are our people, right? Our stories are shaped by the people who are our people. Like, we become who we are within the context of relationship with people who are part of our story. So I challenged us to a few things last week. One of them was to take on a practice of telling people, whether they are our people now or whether they kind of used to be our people, to take that time to say, thank you for being a part of my story. To actually name that, to express that gratitude, which was a practice that I really stumbled into during my sabbatical, just telling these people that kept showing up on This Is Your Life, to say, thank you for being a part of my story. I wondered, did anyone do that? Did you have a moment to recognize that, to pay attention to that? I didn't think so. Oh, yeah, you didn't make it. Okay, yeah. Just kidding. I had full faith in you. But I just bring it up again just to have that, just to be dialed into that as something that you can access, just having that in our vernacular of saying, thank you for being a part of my story. And then the final challenge that I offered was for all of us to continue to pay attention to just like the folks who are a part of our story, who have been in the past, who are now, and to hold on to that this past week, but also in this week to come, because next week we're going to have a chance to share some of those stories with an open mic kind of thing on Labor Day weekend. So we want to hear from you about the stories of the people that God has placed in your life, to share those folks and how they've shaped you. And also the story sharing, though, we get to start doing some of that today, which is really, really, really good. So what we're going to do is hear a story of love, a love story from Sean and Jenny Boyer. Their family has lived through so much transition in the last few years, and they're here to share with us just the what and the how and the why of all of that, how it's unfolded. So before we get to them, though, I want to just hold up a passage of scripture for us to hold today alongside what we will hear. It's printed on the back of your insert if you want to follow on visually. I think we'll have it on the screen. Is it on the screen? Not on the screen. So if you want to see it, pull out that insert just to hear that passage. I actually don't have it. Oh, no, Danny's going to read it. That's right. I was like, I don't have it because I don't have to read it. So friends, again, just a deep breath. We always just want to listen to scripture as something that God can use to speak into our lives. So pay attention to what's curious to you, what stands out to you, what's confusing to you. Let's see. Let's listen together.
Chapter 15, verses 1 through 2. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls to his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls to her friends and neighbors and says, "Rejoice with me, found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents.
So continue to hold that passage as we invite up Jenny and Sean to share with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can we clap? Let's clap. I feel like let's clap. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Friends, let me just pray for them, for this space as we begin this time together. God, we stop and say thank you. And with gratitude and curiosity, we open ourselves up to hear in the love story shared here echoes of the love story that you are inviting each of us to live. That's what stories do. They stir us, and God, you use stories to invite us into this amazing life of love that Jesus has made possible for us. So we open ourselves to all of that now. And we pray for Jenny and Sean. Bless them through their sharing, that they may be enfolded in love and good courage as they speak their story. Thank you. Amen.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
So most people come home from IKEA with furniture and home goods. On the night before Thanksgiving, 4 years ago, we came home with a 6-month-old baby. I'm a crier. We didn't go into the store, mind you. We picked him up in the dimly lit parking lot like a drug deal. The social worker who handed him to us had called a few hours earlier. We'd made a quick trip to Target, for some essentials like bottles and diapers. And within a couple of hours, we were on our way north to pick up a baby from IKEA. It was our first foster care placement. Sorry. Sorry. To become... Go ahead.
To become foster parents, we had completed a packet of paperwork, had a home inspected, we'd been fingerprinted, background checked, and attended 4 days of training. Yet when someone hands you a baby in a parking lot, you feel like, is this really happening? Is this allowed? How can you spend 10 minutes in a dark IKEA parking lot and come out with a baby from a stranger? Keep going. It was very surreal. So how did we get to this point? Shortly after we bought our first house, we began trying to have a baby. And like many, that ended up being harder than it sounded. And around the time we were having to think about what kinds of fertility treatments we were willing to undergo and sort of deciding that we didn't think there were many we were willing to undergo, our pastor had given a sermon on life and legacy. Just thinking about that deathbed moment where you wonder what you did for your world and for God and for your community. And at the time, we were both working full-time, and we realized our life was mainly pointed towards providing for our own comfort. And we tithed and we gave to charity, but we didn't give anything that hurt or impacted our comfort. So that realization that we were focused mainly on ourselves was kind of disturbing. So we kind of took stock after that and said, well, I don't feel called to start a nonprofit. We don't feel called to go to Africa. So we said, well, what about kids? We know there are kids in our community that need a place to live, and we know we want to grow our family. So we decided that if we did get pregnant, we would just have one child, and we made plans to enter foster care in the future. And coincidentally, Sean tells me that my first words after giving birth to Sam were, I am never doing this again.
It's true. So baby C lived with us for about 4 months. We would learn that his mother suffered from mental illness and had a history of making threats with handguns. She would spend most of her days locked in her bedroom. Baby C's 3 older brothers, ages 9 to 13, had been his caregivers. But he had spent most of his life neglected in his crib, and as a result, he was developmentally behind. Most children of his age would smile or laugh or babble. They would hold eye contact. But baby C was detached and unengaged. And during this placement, we had twice weekly visits with a therapist in our home. Baby C made progress, and if you were diligent, you could get a laugh out of him. A couple of months into the placement, we learned that baby C's father had been identified. He lived on the East Coast and had undergone a triple bypass about the time of baby C's birth. Due to his medical issues and the casual nature of his relationship with the mother, he'd been out of touch. So he took a paternity test, and he was indeed confirmed as the father. So we met Michael for an introduction at a visitation center. And he looked to be in his mid-40s and seemed kind and excited to be a dad to baby C. He also had another son who was a young adult. We met Michael a second time at the Olive Garden, along with the social worker, and had a meal together and took some pictures and shed some tears and said goodbye. Go ahead.
It was hard to say goodbye to baby C, but we were also absolutely exhausted. It had been a whirlwind of sleepless nights, formula, guesswork, therapists, social workers. A good friend of ours asked our son Sam, who was 4 at the time, how are things since baby C left? And he said, it's good to have the family back together. But it was true. They were some of the toughest months that our family has experienced to date.
So we took a self-imposed 3-month break from fostering, and Jenny and I booked a trip to Kauai. We attended a foster parent support group, ironically something that we hadn't had any bandwidth to do while we were actually fostering. Here we heard stories so much more difficult than ours. We heard stories of homes where the kitchen knives had to be locked up for safety. Stories.
Stories of foster parents who were physically attacked by their teenage foster children. But we also heard stories of hope and amazing progress and redemption. These people are crazy. In some cases, they are just giving their lives to what seemed like hopeless cases, sacrificing their sanity and safety for those who were forgotten, broken, and ungrateful. When we attended our first foster care training, we came with the mindset that the birth parents are kind of the enemy in this situation. That they're the ones hurting the children, they're the ones neglecting them, and putting them in danger. But our first training really flipped that mindset for us. In the session, our friend Carly told her story. Carly's family had fostered their son JJ from birth until 2. And that's kind of the situation that most people, when people learn that you're fostering and then they say, oh, I could never do that. That's the situation people envision, right? You have a baby until 2 years old and then he has to leave. Oh, I couldn't do that. I would love them too much. That's what happened with Carly's family. JJ's mom had dropped off the map for about a year. Their adoption of JJ was proceeding, but then his mom showed back up, and she was pregnant. She had realized that she was going to lose her second child if she didn't make some changes. So she did hard work. She started to stand on her own 2 feet. She got her own apartment. She created healthy boundaries, and eventually the state granted her custody of her son, JJ. Carly and her family were truly heartbroken. He had become part of their family. But she told our classroom of prospective foster parents, my plan was to save 1 child, and God's plan saved a whole family. And that had such a huge impact on us. So today, Carly's family has continued to be part of JJ's life and part of that birth mom support system. And through that story and others, we realized that our role as foster parents needed to be one of prayer and support for the birth parents that we came in contact with.
So after our self-imposed respite, and hopefully without crying, we notified our foster licensor that we were ready for another placement. Within a few days, Jenny got a call at work. There were 2 brothers who needed a home. They were 1 and 3 years of age. Little was known of their circumstance, except that there was a good chance that they would have in utero drug exposure, as their mother was suspected to be a heroin and meth addict. And spoiler alert, they are the 2 little kids that you guys see us dragging around here. On that same afternoon, the boys arrived at our house, and Aiden began immediately to call us mom and dad. So that solved a common problem for foster parents, which is, what do our foster kids call us? But we would soon find out that any adult woman would be called mom and any guy dad. Out in public, the boys would run up to complete strangers and want to be picked up. Therapists would refer to this as an attachment issue. And attachment issues are very common for foster children. When you live with uncertainty and neglect and are shuffled from home to home, it impedes your ability to bond with your caregiver. And so everyone becomes a potential caregiver. Aiden was a little 3-year-old ball of energy. He talked nonstop, but we could only understand a few of his words. He didn't know any colors and couldn't count to 3. 1, 2, 4 was a thing for several months. And he would throw himself on the floor and yell 10 to 15 times a day as he got upset. And he even struggled with simple directions like, go get the book from the table. And speaking of Sarah's earlier thing, Corey and Steph have been our people through this whole journey. So shout out to you guys. Ronnie was 15 months at the time, and he was basically shell-shocked. He wanted to be held constantly, and so for the first few months, I would strap him into a baby carrier on my chest while working around the house. He made very few sounds and was also developmentally behind, according to the screener who did the boys' intake evaluation. So we began to address the boys' issues, and we began to address our issues. You know that kid throwing a fit in the grocery store? The one who's completely out of control? Well, one of the reasons it's so easy to judge that kid or parent is that you have no attachment to them.
When you birth a child, there is a strong emotional attachment to your child from birth. And for foster kids and parents, that's work that has to be done in order to develop healthy attachment. For the child, the attachment means security, and for the parent, that means patience and less frustration.
And so you know those little moments where someone has a chance to speak into your life? I vividly remember 2 such moments that helped me on my journey of bonding with our boys. The first came via a sermon from our speaker who had felt very unwanted as a child. At a time where he was so vulnerable, he had been told that he was a champion by a camp counselor. To a kid from a loving family, that doesn't mean much, right? But to a kid who isn't getting any positive affirmation at home, it's huge. And at the time, our boys were into pirates and treasure. And so as I put the boys to bed at night, I began to put a pirate spin on what that speaker had been told. And I told all my boys that they were my treasure. And that, at the time, was a stretch for me. And mostly, I was frustrated with Aiden. He was 3 years old, and as everyone who has been around kids knows, the terrible twos may be good alliteration, but it's got nothing on the terrible threes. So each night, as I would tuck our boys into bed, I would tell them that they were my treasure. And little by little, my heart grew fonder. We continued to provide all of the essentials, of course, but I became more capable of genuine affection. And I became more patient. And I lost my cool less often.
And for me, it's taken longer. Sean's a stay-at-home dad, so he's with the boys all day long, and I've had less time over time with them. I'm not naturally a nurturing person. I'm a competitive perfectionist. So parenthood is very much a test of character for me, and I often fail. There are moms who say they love their foster children from the moment they walked in, the same as their birth children. For me, it hasn't worked like that. It's taken years to bond and mold into a family. But I really thank God that He welcomes me into His family and has grace for me over and over. And I pray also that our children are too young to remember a lot of my mistakes.
So we continue forward. And as you might expect, there are lots of twists. There were lots of twists and turns along the way. 6 months in, the boys' mom went to rehab and remained clean for a couple months afterwards. And we began to contemplate a future where the boys would go back to be with her. And after a relapse, the boys' grandmother stepped in and said that she wanted the boys. Mind you, this was a year and a half into their placement in our home. But CPS issues from her own past, as well as alcohol on her breath while attending court, precluded her from being a suitable caregiver according to the state. So for us, this kind of reality is so hard to imagine. We grew up in very different families from these families that we were encountering. And as we watched the boy's birth mom go through treatment and then relapse within a couple of months, it was very heartbreaking, and the deck seemed stacked against her. No one in her extended family was without substance abuse issues. How does she overcome her past and her criminal record to get stable housing and a job? How does she deal with the trauma of her childhood when every day is so likely to inflict new traumas? I don't know. But I know that I'm a lot more aware of this trap than I was before. And I'm a lot less likely to cast judgment. I'm a lot less likely to cast stones.
One of the reasons that I believe in Jesus is what I see in the lives around me. People who are living out what Jesus asks for us, to give and serve, to turn the other cheek, they have the fruit of the Spirit in their lives. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. That's an amazing list. That's what I want in my life. So I think God puts things in our lives that we can choose to walk into and allow Him to refine us. And refining is painful and humbling. And as I fail over and over to be the mother that I want to be every day, I have to ask God and my boys for forgiveness and then try to accept it. But what grows is my ability to love, to give mercy, to forgive as I've been forgiven, and to open my perspective, and like Sean said, to be less likely to cast stones.
So fast forward 2.5 years into this placement, the court chose to terminate parental rights for Aiden and Ronnie's birth mom. It had been 1.5 years since her relapse, and she'd taken no steps forward, had no visits with her kids, and had stopped attending court or responding to her lawyer. And in the scheme of things, she'd been given more time to turn things around than most.
In 3 years, the boys had become part of our family. The 3 boys together are no different than any other brothers, and we couldn't imagine life without them. Yet we now realize that the act of adoption is one of beauty and sadness. It's a severing of that first relationship. So we tried to acknowledge in our house and make space for the tears. But actual adoption day was truly joyous. Every single member of our family was there. Parents, siblings, nieces and nephews, and our best friends. It was a showing of our clan, our community, coming around us and showing that Aiden and Ronnie were not just being adopted into our small family, but into the big family. And they had accepted them from the start and just shown the true love of God to them. It was, we talk about what is the kingdom of heaven like. This was a little glimpse of the kingdom of heaven that day.
So last month we sat down with Aiden and Ronnie's birth mom for dinner. And we had dinner with a heroin addict. I can assure you that wasn't our goal. When we set out to become foster parents 4 years ago, we would have seen a dangerous person.
It was hard and great and heartbreaking. We're trying to keep taking steps that aren't just taking into account our own preferences, but thinking about what's best for our children and for this young woman who has very little support in her life. We tried to extend to her love and gentleness and space to see who her boys are growing into. And at the end of our visit, while she and Aiden cried into each other's arms, I was struck with how wrong it was. That there shouldn't be any reason for this boy who loves his mother and this mother who loves her boy to be separated. But for so many reasons, it's no longer possible or safe. And the next weekend, we had a visit with their dad. And it wasn't as hard for the boys, but it was also heartbreaking to see him process what he's lost. And through those visits, though, we got to learn more of those things that are sometimes missing for adoptive families. We got to hear Ronnie's birth story. We got to see that Aiden has his father's eyes and Ronnie has his mother's smile. We got to hear stories of their early childhood, and we got to share with them what a delightful, silly goofball Ronnie is and how thoughtful and affectionate Aiden is, and we got to share how well they're doing in school. So that's where we are. We don't know what we're doing, but we know that through this process, God has helped shape our hearts to be more open and compassionate. And we know we want to continue living in a way that helps bring the kingdom of heaven here on earth by being present in our community and loving the unloved. And we're not sure what's ahead in our past, but we keep listening for God's voice. And in the meantime, we're so, so thankful for the gift that we have in Aiden and Ronnie being part of our family. Thanks.
I mean, come on, people. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are also so overwhelmingly grateful for the beautiful gifts God gave you in Aiden and Ronnie, and thank you for taking us through that journey. Thank you for sharing your story. There's so many things that move me to tears just being in this story with you. I was reading through their notes this week and as we planned for worship today, and it just like the whole time, I was like crying the whole time, just like reading the words of this story. And finally, I asked myself, I kept coming back to it. It's like, I know what's coming, but I still am just so, I'm crying, and I'm like, okay, what's going on in this? What is it about your story that really just draws that emotional response out of me, out of us, right? And I think there's something to this, that witnessing deep love and sacrifice, which we hear in your story, it activates deep love and that sense of sacrifice in us too. And when we witness it, it stirs in that place. It says, yes, me too. It stirs that place that Mary Oliver spoke of when she said, tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. Like, it stirs that place in us because we want to live that kind of life. At Salt House, we talk about trying to be a school for love, like to actually gather as people who want to learn how to love more deeply. And we hold, the life of Jesus is the center of kind of what we're looking at when we try to live this life. And as much as I love like bullet points, like tell me how to live a life of love. Just like, can we just make a list about what that looks like? It's like, it's not actually a list. It is not, that's not how Jesus shows us this life. It's through story. And so to share our stories, we get to see signs of Jesus's life, of what that can look like in our lives, glimpses of this mystery of how God works. And none of us get it right, but our stories can be birthed from that same place of deep love and sacrifice. Jenny and Sean named it, as this unsettled feeling that we're just living this life for ourselves. We want to live a life beyond ourselves. And we have that place too. So I just wonder, friends, if like me, you're in this place, in touch with that tender place, that fierce place in you of deep love and sacrifice, whether it speaks to a longing that you have for that, whether it kind of stirs a place where you're like, oh yeah, I am in it right now. But I wonder if that's being stirred in you. I just invite you to stay in touch with that place, that longing, and I invite you to hold the questions that we try to come back to here at Salt House as we listen for God on this path that we're all on. So these questions of, what is God saying to me? And really we stay in that first question for a long time, right? And then after we have a sense of what God is saying to us, then we move into this, like, what am I going to do about it? So I'd invite you again, just in the response that you have from today, to just hold that question, what is God saying to you in this? And then when it's time, move into the, what are you going to do about it? And it could be a big thing, it could be a little thing, but just pay attention to those questions. So hold these questions as we close, stay in that tender place that we've been opened up to, and we're going to turn to a song written by one of our friends, Justin McRoberts. He's been here in our community before, and it just sings of what we all hope for in our lives, a life well lived. So hold all of it, sing as you would like, pray as you need to, and thank you again, Boyers, for stirring in us our own stories of love and sacrifice. And we just give such thanks to God for Ronnie and for Aiden, just signs of what God can do when we dare to love beyond ourselves. So thank you.